All right, this is your week 7 part 2. I should be able to get everything into this second video here. Before I move on from this image, I'm just sort of picking up where I left off on that part 1 video. What I went over here was two basic adjustments. If you remember, I'll just click over here using the adjustment brush, which is how we got that leaf done, and the graduated filter, and that sort of darken this top area. What I want you to do when thinking about sort of where to head with Project 3 images is develop your set of images. I believe it's 8 or 10, I can't quite remember. Please look that up. I believe it's 8 images, and develop each image probably in this sort of what we did with this whites and blacks, and then look, are there specific areas that need adjusting? I would never say, because it's really not like appropriate, that you have to use a graduated filter, you have to use an adjustment brush on a particular area. That's going to be determined per image. As I look at sort of Project 3, I might start suggesting and saying, you know, if you were to go back, you might want to make an adjustment on a particular area. I want you guys to start sort of making those decisions. Again, we're not going crazy with the exposure, with the contrast, with the highlights. I think those of you who did that know who you are. Not the end of the world for projects 1 and 2, as we're just sort of getting used to this thing. But we're really just doing some basic optimizing, some basic adjustments to these images. We want these final groups to look consistent. We want them to look similar in terms of exposure. One last thing before I move on to talking about some images that I picked out is some metadata over here. When you import a picture, you should see a couple things in your histogram over here. You should see the film speed. Your film speed should be somewhere in between 100 and 400. You might see the sort of length of your lens, your aperture, and then more importantly, and might be difficult to see here, but is the shutter speed. A few of you had images that were out of focus. There are two ways images can be out of focus for the most part. One has to do with being too close to an image, or sorry, too close to a subject matter. If that's the case, back up. Your lens only has the ability, depending on the lens, to sort of focus at a given distance. The other is going to be the shutter speed. Okay, those of you who shot in dark situations at night, if you remember, my projects 1 and 2 said to be outside. Most importantly, probably in some bright sunlight. If your shutter speeds get below a 60th of a second, and you should be able to see that right there, meaning a 30th of a second, a 10th of a second, an 1/8 of a second, you cannot hold your camera still enough. Okay, so if you got some comments on Project 1 or 2 that stated things were blurry or out of focus, you got to watch out for that. So two quick things here before I move into talking about some images. So again, optimize, develop. We're looking for consistent groups when we hand in those final images. Remember, your developed images are due for Project 3 next week. Okay. Now, I'm going to take a look at two images. These are Sierra's group of line. And a lot of what I talk about when I sort of make comments on D2L, I use these phrases, sort of similar phrases, dynamic, engaging, considered. These are all sort of similar words, or similar words in terms of photography that have to do with good composition. The idea behind line was to create dynamic compositions. When I say dynamic, I mean movement. In this image, we're sort of shooting back into space. We're shooting back into space with the angle of this line. This image uses very shallow depth of field. The only area that's in focus is right here. That has to do with the aperture being wide open, and you get what is considered shallow depth of field. Very dynamic image, an image that sort of engages with texture, with line, and sort of keeps the eye interested as we sort of move through it. Image number 7 here, very similar, very simple, in terms of line. Very, very sort of elegant. I think much different than that first image because it's sort of softer. The lines are more wispy, but it's kind of frenzied. There's a lot going on in a small amount of space. So I think two very, very good line images. The next line I'm going to look at are Madison's here, and a few in this group. A lot of what I think is sort of interesting about some of the good examples, and I'm just picking two students here. As we move through the semester, we'll see. You guys will be critiquing on this next project. These are sort of mundane things, meaning sort of everyday things. Here we have, this is a garden hose as far as I can tell. Not inherently all that interesting as a sort of object unto itself, but sort of photographically speaking, really sort of filled the frame. We're using color. There's a nice highlight coming off of this, and there's a lot of movement. Okay, lines sort of scooting up into space. Okay, lots of movement throughout an image like this. This is composed very similar to that image of Sierras that we looked at of the sort of wood moving back into space. A couple more examples. This example, we can all sort of quickly sort of understand what this thing is. But again, everyday objects sort of creating good composition. We're interested in these things as photographs. What are they doing as photographs? What are they doing in terms of how they were framed, not necessarily sort of what we're interested in. Okay, I'm not interested in bike tires. I'm not interested in brick walls, garden hoses. Okay, but photographically speaking, these are strong images. So look at what it was sort of said about Project 1. Again, I'm about halfway through Project 2. Getting some grades up and comments on those. I do like to take the time to comment on particular images, so it takes me a little while with the quantity of images that we're sort of dealing with here at the beginning. As I said, as we move through in the coming weeks, you're going to be commenting on each other's work, and I'm going to go over that a little more in depth when we get there in terms of the expectation of that. So look at your comments for Project 1. If you had an issue, meaning if you don't have a grade up there, please correct that issue. Please contact me with anything that you need help with.